My name is Ruth, and I am 53 years old. The sound of rain against my kitchen window was the only guest at my birthday party. It tapped a lonely rhythm, a stark contrast to the memory of just 5 years ago, when this very room was filled with laughter, the smell of chocolate cake, and the warm, tight hug of my daughter, Sarah. "You're the best mom in the world," she'd whispered into my ear, her voice sincere, her love a tangible thing I could almost hold in my hands. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Now, the silence was so heavy it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I'd made a small cake, just a single-serving thing from the grocery store. It felt silly, but some stubborn part of me refused to let the day pass completely unmarked. I was sticking the single candle into the thick frosting when my phone lit up, buzzing across the wooden table. My heart, that foolish organ, gave a little leap. Sarah. It had to be. She'd remember. She'd call. But the screen didn't show her picture. It showed my sister, Clara. I love Clara, but her love is a sturdy, practical thing, like a well-built shovel, not the delicate, emotional balm I craved in that moment. "Happy birthday, Ruth," she said, her voice brisk but kind. "What are your plans?" "Oh, you know," I said, trying to sound light, "a quiet evening. Just me and a good book." The lie tasted bitter. There was a pause on the other end. Clara has a built-in lie detector for my voice. She didn't call, did she? I didn't have to ask who she was. The tears I'd been holding back all day welled up, hot and insistent. No, not a text, nothing. I heard her sharp intake of breath. That girl. I swear, Ruth, since she married that man. "Mark has nothing to do with it," I interjected, a reflex born from years of defending the indefensible. Mark was Sarah's husband of 3 years. A slick, handsome financial advisor who had, from the moment he entered her life, slowly and systematically begun to rebuild my daughter's world with himself at the very center, pushing everyone else, especially me, to the distant periphery. "He has everything to do with it," Clara snapped. "He's isolated her. You used to talk every day. Now you're lucky if you get a cursory text on a major holiday. It's not right, Ruth. It's financial and emotional manipulation, and you're letting it happen." "What am I supposed to do, Clara? Force my way in? She's a grown woman. She's made her choice." The words were ashes in my mouth. "Her choice, or his," Clara countered, her voice softening slightly. "Look, I have to go. But Grace is on her way over with dinner. Don't you dare tell her you've already eaten." As if on cue, a gentle knock came at the front door. I hung up with Clara and went to let in my other sister, Grace. Where Clara was a shovel, Grace was a warm blanket. She stood there, holding a casserole dish, her silver hair damp from the rain, her eyes full of a sympathy that nearly undid me. "Oh, Ruthie," she said softly, stepping in and pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and baked pasta. "I'm so sorry." She didn't specify what for, and she didn't need to. She set the dish on the counter and saw the pathetic little single-serving cake next to it. Her face crumpled for a moment before she composed herself. "None of that now," she declared, her voice firm but gentle. "We are celebrating you, me, and this glorious tuna casserole." We sat at the small kitchen table, the rain our accompaniment. I told her about my day, about the silence from Sarah, about the hollow ache that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in my chest since my granddaughter, Lily, was born 2 years ago. I'd seen her a handful of times. Mark and Sarah always had a reason why visits were inconvenient. "It's nap time. She's cranky. We're so busy." The photos on social media were my only window into Lily's life, and they were a special kind of torture. There was Mark's mother, holding Lily, beaming. There was Sarah, looking like the perfect, polished wife and mother in a beautiful home I was rarely invited to. I bought a present for Lily. I confessed to Grace, pushing my food around my plate. A little stuffed elephant. It's sitting in the guest room, still in the bag. I don't even know if I should send it. The last few things I sent, I never saw her play with them in any pictures. I don't think they want my clutter in their perfect house. Grace reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. This isn't about clutter, Ruthie. This is about you. Your love. And they are rejecting it. It's the cruelest thing I've ever seen. Later that night, after Grace had left, the house felt emptier than ever. I wandered into the living room, my eyes falling on the wall of photographs. There was Sarah as a gap-toothed 7-year-old, beaming from my shoulders. There she was at 16, rolling her eyes but smiling as I tried to fix her graduation cap. There we were, just a few years ago, our heads close together, laughing at something long forgotten. The woman in that picture, the one with the easy smile and the light in her eyes, felt like a stranger to me now. I picked up a recent photo of Sarah, Mark, and Lily. They looked like a perfect, glossy advertisement for a life I wasn't a part of. And in that moment, a cold, hard certainty settled in my soul. Clara was right. This wasn't just distance. This was a campaign. A slow, careful erasure. And I had been so desperate to hold onto any shred of a relationship, so afraid of pushing Sarah further away, that I had allowed it to happen. I was the foundation upon which Sarah had built her life. I was the one who worked double shifts as a secretary after David died to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I was the one who stayed up late, helping with science projects, who cried with her over her first heartbreak, who sold my own wedding ring to help with her college deposit. I had poured every ounce of my being, every resource I had, into that girl. And now, I was being treated like a worn-out piece of furniture that no longer fit the new decor. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. A 53-year-old woman, alone in a silent house, on her birthday. The pain was a physical, grinding thing, but beneath it, for the first time, I felt a spark. A tiny, defiant flicker of anger. They thought I was weak. They thought I was passive. They thought my love was a bottomless well they could ignore until they needed a drink. But a well can run dry. And a quiet woman. Well, a quiet woman has nothing but time to think. And to plan. The phone rang again, startling me. Hope, that treacherous thing, flared once more. I rushed to it, my heart in my throat. It was Sarah. I fumbled to answer. Sarah, honey? Hi, Mom. Her voice was cool, distant. Sorry I missed your call earlier. We've been crazy busy. She hadn't missed my call. I hadn't dared to make one. That's all right, sweetheart. I was just thinking about you. How's Lily? She's fine. Look, Mom, the reason I'm calling. She took a breath, and I could almost hear Mark in the background, feeding her the lines. We're thinking of buying a bigger place. A proper family home. You know how cramped this condo is. That's wonderful news, I said, my voice thin. Yeah, it is. But, well, the down payment is huge. Mark said, we were wondering, you've always said you wanted to help us get settled. There it was. Not a happy birthday, Mom. Not a we love you. A request. A transaction. The spark inside me grew a little brighter, a little hotter. How much? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. 50,000, she said, as if asking for a cup of sugar. It would just be a loan, of course. We'd pay you back. Of course. Just like the loan for Mark's new car. Just like the loan for their lavish vacation to Hawaii last year, loans that were never mentioned again. I was silent for a long moment, looking around the home that David and I had built, filled with the memories of a life that was being systematically dismantled. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here, Sarah," I said softly. "Let me think about it, okay? I'll need to look at my finances." The silence on her end was stunned. I had never hesitated before. Never. "Oh, okay, sure. Just let us know soon. The market is really hot." We said our stilted goodbyes and hung up. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the silence once again pressing in, but it felt different now. It no longer felt empty. It felt expectant. They thought I wasn't special enough for their time, for their love, for a place in their perfect new world. They saw me as a resource to be managed, a nuisance to be tolerated, a wallet to be opened. But a will is a powerful thing. It's the last story you ever tell, the final word. And I had just decided that my final word was going to be a twist that none of them saw coming. The week after my birthday passed in a strange, suspended state. The conversation with Sarah played on a loop in my mind, each repetition hardening that new, quiet resolve inside me. The sheer audacity of it, to forget my birthday, to offer no warmth, and then, with cold practicality, to ask for a sum of money that represented years of my scrimping and saving. It was a splash of ice water that finally woke me from a long, painful sleep. I didn't call her back. For the first time in my life, I made my daughter wait, and the silence from her end was deafening. She didn't call to check on me, to see if I was feeling unwell, to ask if something was wrong. Her silence confirmed everything. She was only waiting for an answer. The person behind the answer didn't matter. It was Grace who noticed the change in me first. She came over on Thursday, her knitting bag in tow, a permanent fixture of her comforting presence. "You're different, Ruthie," she said, her needles clicking a soft, rhythmic tune. "You're quiet, but it's not the sad quiet from before. It's a thinking quiet." I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one David had always claimed, looking out at the garden. The rose bushes he'd planted for our 10th anniversary were starting to bud. "I am thinking, Grace," I admitted, my voice low. "I'm thinking about all of it, the slow fade. Do you remember the first time I was unavailable?" Grace paused her knitting, her eyes soft with memory. "It was Lily's christening, wasn't it?" A sharp pain, old but still potent, lanced through me. Yes. They told me it was going to be a very small, intimate ceremony. Just immediate family. I bought a new dress. I was so excited. I could still feel the crisp fabric of that navy dress, still see it hanging in my closet unworn. The day before, Sarah called. She was so apologetic. She said the church had a strict limit on guests because of renovations. She said it broke her heart, but they had to keep it to just parents. Grace's face tightened with a rare flash of anger. "And then you saw the pictures online." "Not just parents," I whispered, the betrayal still fresh. "Mark's parents, his 3 siblings, their spouses, his aunts, uncles, cousins, and what looked like half of his country club. It wasn't a church limit, it was a me limit." I looked at Grace, my vision blurring. She looked me in the eye and lied to me, Grace. She looked at the woman who held her hand through every scraped knee and broken heart, and she lied so I wouldn't be in the pictures. "Oh, honey." Grace set her knitting aside and came to kneel beside my chair, taking my hands. "Why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you just take it?" What was I supposed to say? I asked, my voice cracking. Accuse my own daughter of deliberately excluding me? She would have denied it, said I was being dramatic, that I was trying to make her special day about me, and Mark, he would have given me that patronizing smile of his and said, "Now, Ruth, you know how stressful wedding planning is. Don't add to Sarah's burden." So I swallowed it. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. I sent a generous check as a christening gift and pretended my heart wasn't shattered. That was the pattern. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone, there was an excuse. A reason why my presence was suddenly inconvenient. Thanksgiving? Oh, Mom, we're going to Mark's parents' lake house this year. It's just easier with the baby. My birthday the previous year? Lily has a terrible cold, Mom. We wouldn't want to get you sick. Each time, the excuse was wrapped in a thin veneer of concern, but the message was clear: you are not a priority. You are not part of this inner circle. And each time, I would see the evidence on social media later. The big, boisterous Thanksgiving dinner at their own home, Lily perfectly healthy and smiling. The fancy dinner out Sarah and Mark had enjoyed on my actual birthday. They weren't even careful about their lies anymore. They didn't have to be. They knew I would never confront them. They knew I was too afraid of losing the tiny scraps of contact I was thrown. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that made both Grace and I jump. She patted my hand and went to answer it. I knew who it was before I heard the voice. "Clara, have you heard from her?" Clara demanded, marching into the living room without bothering to take off her coat. She was a force of nature, my older sister, her hair a defiant steel-gray helmet, her eyes missing nothing. "Not since she asked for the money," I said. "Good." Clara planted her hands on her hips. Let her stew. Let her wonder why the doormat has suddenly grown thorns. "Clara, that's a little harsh," Grace murmured, returning to her seat. "It's the truth," Clara retorted. "Ruth, you have to understand what's happening here. It's a classic playbook. Isolate the target that's you from their support system. Then, create a sense of dependency. All the while, they're devaluing you, making you feel like you're lucky to get any attention at all. And finally, they make their big move for the assets. This down payment is the big move." "I know," I said, and the steadiness of my own voice surprised me. Both of my sisters stared at me. "You know?" Clara repeated. "I do now," I said. "It took me a long time to see it because I didn't want to. What mother wants to believe her child is capable of such calculated cruelty? But it's not just Sarah. It's him. He's the architect. She's the foreman, carrying out his plans." "And what are you going to do about it?" Clara asked, her gaze intense. I took a deep breath, looking from Clara's fierce, expectant face to Grace's worried one. "I'm not giving them the money," I stated. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and it felt like a declaration of independence. Grace gasped softly. "Oh, Ruth." "What will you tell her?" "The truth," I said, a plan beginning to form in the quiet, determined corners of my mind. Or a version of it. "I'll tell her that my finances are tied up, that it's not a good time. I'll be vague." Clara nodded, a slow, approving smile spreading across her face. "Good. That will force their hand. They'll either have to back down, or they'll show their true colors. My money is on the latter." "And then what?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. "If they get angry? If they cut you off completely?" The old me would have crumbled at that thought. The me that existed just a week ago would have done anything, given anything, to avoid that outcome. But the new me, the one who had spent a lonely birthday staring into the abyss of her own life, felt a strange calm. "Then, Grace," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "they will have made their choice perfectly clear. And I will have to make mine." Later, after my sisters had left, I went to the small, fireproof lockbox I kept on the top shelf of my closet. I took it down, the metal cool against my fingers. Inside were the important documents of my life. My marriage certificate, David's death certificate, the deed to the house, and my will. I hadn't looked at it in years. David and I had made simple, straightforward wills after Sarah was born. Everything to the other, And then, upon the second death, everything to Sarah. It was what you did. You built a life for your children. You passed it on. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I unfolded the document, the paper crisp. I read the familiar lines, the legal language that now felt like a relic from another lifetime. I give, devise, and bequeath all of my estate, of whatever kind and wherever located, to my beloved daughter, Sarah Marie Evans, if she survives me. Beloved daughter, the words seemed to mock me. I thought of Lily, my granddaughter, with her mother's eyes. She was innocent in all this. She didn't deserve to be a pawn. But Sarah and Mark, they saw my life's work as their eventual inheritance, a guaranteed payout for their betrayal. They were counting down the days until they could cash in. A cold, clear certainty settled over me. They saw my will as the end of the story, the final chapter where they got the prize. But what if I rewrote the ending? I picked up a pen. I didn't make any marks on the document itself. That would come later, with a lawyer. But in my mind, I began to draft a new story. A story where love was rewarded, and betrayal was met not with forgiveness, but with consequence. A story where the quiet, overlooked mother had the last, powerful word. I closed the box and put it back on the shelf. The seed had been planted. Now, I just had to wait for it to grow. The call came exactly 1 week after Sarah's initial request. I was in the garden, pulling weeds from around David's roses with a kind of ferocious energy. The physical labor felt good. It was a tangible problem I could solve, unlike the tangled mess of my relationship with my daughter. The sun was warm on my back, and for a few moments, I could almost forget the storm brewing on the horizon. Then my phone, sitting on the garden bench, vibrated. I wiped the dirt from my hands onto my old jeans and saw Sarah's name. My stomach clenched. The moment of truth. I took a deep breath, willing my voice to be calm, neutral. Sarah, hello. Hi, Mom. Her tone was clipped, all business. No, how are you? No small talk. Have you had a chance to think about what we discussed? The we was pointed. She and Mark. A united front. I have, honey, I said, sitting down on the bench. I've been looking over my finances, and I'm afraid now isn't a good time for me to part with such a large amount of money. A lot of it is tied up in long-term investments. The lie was smooth, practiced. I'd rehearsed it in the shower, in the car, in the quiet of the night. The silence on the other end was profound. I could practically hear the gears grinding to a halt in her head. This was not the script. What do you mean? She finally stammered. Mom, this is for our house, for Lily's future. You've always said you wanted to help us. And I have helped, Sarah, I said, my voice still gentle but firm. Many times. But this is just more than I can manage right now. I'm sure you and Mark will find another way. You're both so resourceful. I layered the statement with just a hint of the pride I used to feel, the kind a mother should feel for her capable, independent daughter. It was the wrong thing to say. Or perhaps the most right thing. Her voice changed. The thin veneer of daughterly respect evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard anger I had never heard directed at me before. Resourceful? Do you have any idea what the housing market is like right now? This isn't some frivolous purchase, Mom. This is for our family. This is for your granddaughter. She was using Lily as a weapon. The realization was like a punch to the gut. I know that, Sarah. And I love Lily more than anything. But my financial security is important too. I'm not as young as I used to be. I have to think about my own future. Your future? She scoffed. What future? You sit in that big, empty house all day doing nothing. What do you need all that money for? It's not like you're going anywhere. The cruelty of her words stole my breath. You sit in that big, empty house all day, doing nothing. Is that what she thought of my life? Of the home filled with memories of her father, of her childhood? Is that what I had been reduced to? A placeholder, waiting to die so they could claim their inheritance? Sarah, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. That is a horrible thing to say. It's the truth. She shot back, her voice rising. You're being selfish. After everything we're trying to build, you're holding us back because you're hoarding your money like a miser. Mark was right about you. Mark was right about you. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just Sarah's frustration. This was Mark's narrative, and she was parroting it perfectly. What? I asked, each word measured. Is Mark right about? That you've never really supported us. That you're jealous of our happiness. That you'd rather see us struggle than part with a single dime of what you think is yours. I closed my eyes, the bright sun against my lids painting spots of red and orange. The garden, once a place of peace, now felt like a battleground. The money is mine, Sarah, I said, my voice low and steady. Every penny of it, earned by me and your father. And I decide what to do with it. And my decision is no. There was a sharp, incredulous intake of breath. Then, the line went dead. She had hung up on me. My hands were shaking. I set the phone down carefully on the bench, as if it were a live explosive. I felt nauseous. The confrontation I had dreaded for years had finally happened, and it was worse than I could have ever imagined. The venom in her voice, the sheer entitlement, the utter lack of love or respect, it was all out in the open now. The pretense was gone. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the vibrant red of the rosebuds without really seeing them. The sound of a car pulling into my driveway barely registered. It was only when I heard Grace's worried voice calling my name that I looked up. Ruth? Ruthie, are you all right? You're white as a sheet. She was carrying a bag of groceries, her weekly ritual. She took one look at my face and hurried over, setting the bag on the ground and sitting beside me. What happened? She called, I whispered. I told her no. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Oh no. And she said, I tried to repeat the words, but they stuck in my throat. I shook my head, tears finally spilling over. She hung up on me, Grace. My own daughter hung up on me. Grace wrapped her arms around me, and I sobbed into her shoulder, the grief a raw, tearing thing. It was the death of a relationship, right there in the sunny garden, and the pain was excruciating. She's gone, I cried. The little girl I raised is gone. That was a stranger. I know, honey, I know, Grace murmured, rocking me gently. But you stood your ground. I'm so proud of you. Proud? I felt shattered. But even through the shattering, that small, hard spark of resolve remained. It had survived its first real test. An hour later, Clara arrived, summoned by Grace. She listened to the story, her face a stony mask. When I finished, she simply nodded. Good, she said, her voice flat. The mask is off. Now you see the enemy clearly. She's not the enemy, Clara, Grace protested, her eyes red from crying. She's a confused young woman under the influence of a manipulative man. She's a grown adult who makes choices. Clara countered, her gaze fixed on me. And she just made a very clear one. She chose him. She chose greed. Over you. Remember that, Ruth. Don't you ever forget the things she said to you today. I wouldn't. The words were burned into my soul. You sit in that big, empty house all day, doing nothing. That evening, after my sisters had left, the house was truly quiet, but the silence no longer felt lonely. It felt purposeful. I walked from room to room, running my hand over the furniture David had built, the walls we had painted together. This wasn't just a house, it was a life. A good life. A life of love and hard work. And it was my life. Not Sarah's to covet, not Mark's to scheme over. I went to the hall closet and pulled out an old, dusty photo album. I sat on the floor in the living room and opened it. Pictures of Sarah as a baby, cradled in my arms. Pictures of her and David building a snowman. Pictures of Christmases, birthdays, ordinary days, filled with extraordinary love. I cried again, but these were different tears. They were tears of mourning for what was lost, but also of gratitude for what had been. I had been a good mother. I had loved with my whole heart. Her failure to honor that was her failure, not mine. I closed the album and looked around my big, empty house. It wasn't empty, it was full of me. It was full of my history, my resilience, my love. And it was time I started acting like it. The unraveling was complete. The old dynamic was dead. And from its ashes, something new was beginning to stir. Something stronger. Something with a plan. The days after the phone call with Sarah were some of the strangest of my life. It was as if a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety I had lived with for years had suddenly been switched off, replaced by a profound, unnerving stillness. The waiting was over, the worst had happened. She had shown me her true face, and while the sight of it would haunt me forever, it also freed me. I no longer had to dread the moment it would appear. It was here, and I had survived. There were no more calls. No angry texts. No pleading messages from a contrite Sarah. Just silence. It was their new tactic, I realized. The cold shoulder. They were trying to punish me, to make me so desperate for contact that I would cave and give them the money. What they didn't understand was that the silence was a gift. It gave me space to think, to breathe, to remember who I was without the constant sting of their rejection. It was during this quiet period that I decided to finally tackle the basement. It was a task I'd been putting off for a decade, a dark, damp repository for the physical memories of a lifetime. David's old toolboxes, boxes of Sarah's childhood artwork, outdated furniture, and who knew what else languished down there. I suppose, on some level, I felt the need to physically sort through the past, to decide what to keep and what to let go of. I armed myself with a powerful flashlight, a pair of sturdy gloves, and a resolve I hadn't felt in years. The air was cool and smelled of dust and old paper. I started in the far corner, methodically opening cardboard boxes, their sides soft with age. I found treasures that made me smile through tears. David's old leather-bound journals filled with his neat, architectural handwriting. The tiny, hand-knitted sweater Sarah wore home from the hospital. A shoebox full of love letters David and I had exchanged before we were married. These I set aside in a keep pile. They were the foundation, they were non-negotiable. Then there were the things to let go of. Old textbooks, broken appliances, stacks of yellowed newspapers. I created a donate pile and a trash pile, and I worked with a grim efficiency that felt cathartic. It was when I moved a heavy, water-stained box from behind the old furnace that I found it. It was a metal lockbox, smaller than the one in my closet, and rusted at the edges. I didn't recognize it. I tugged it out into the dim light of the single bare bulb, my back protesting. It was locked. Curiosity, a sensation I hadn't felt in a long time, sparked inside me. What was this? I tried to think back. Had David hidden it? He was a meticulous man, but not a secretive one. I carried the box upstairs, its weight surprising me, and set it on the kitchen table. I rummaged through David's old toolbox in the garage until I found a crowbar. With a sense of grim determination, I wedged the tip under the lid and leaned my weight into it. The old lock groaned, then snapped with a sharp, metallic crack. I lifted the lid. The inside was pristine, protected from the damp of the basement, and it was full of papers. On top was a faded, legal-sized envelope. My name was written on it in David's handwriting. A cold trickle of apprehension ran down my spine. I carefully picked up the envelope. It was sealed. With trembling fingers, I tore it open and pulled out several sheets of paper. The heading on the first page made my heart stop. Last Will and Testament of David Allen Thompson. This wasn't the will I had in my lockbox upstairs. This was something else. I sat down heavily at the table and began to read. It was a newer will, dated just 6 months before his death. The will I had probated, the one that left everything to me, was years older. Why had he made a new one? And why had he hidden it? My eyes scanned the legalese, my pulse thrumming in my ears. The first parts were the same, everything to me. But then I reached a new section, a clause I had never seen before. It was called a testamentary trust. I read the words once, twice, a third time, my mind refusing to process their meaning. In the event that my beloved wife, Ruth Eleanor Thompson, predeceases me, or in the event that we die simultaneously, I direct that my entire estate shall be placed in a trust for the benefit of our daughter, Sarah Marie Evans. That was standard. But it was the next part that made the blood drain from my face. The trustee of this trust shall be my wife's sister, Clara Margaret Evans. The trust assets shall be distributed to Sarah in increments, 1/3 upon her 30th birthday, 1/3 upon her 35th birthday, and the final third upon her 40th birthday, provided that the trustee, in her sole and absolute discretion, determines that Sarah is managing her finances in a responsible manner and has not fallen under the undue influence of any individual who seeks to isolate her from her family. I stopped reading, the paper shaking in my hands. Undue influence. Isolate her from her family. David had seen it. Even then, all those years ago, he had seen the potential for this. He had known, with a father's intuition, that Sarah's trusting heart could be led astray. He had put a safeguard in place. Clara. He had chosen Clara to be the gatekeeper. But why had he hidden it? I read the final paragraph, and my breath caught in my throat. I have chosen not to inform Ruth of this provision, as I do not wish to burden her with concerns about our daughter's future or create strife between them. I have the utmost faith in Ruth's judgment, but I also know her heart is soft where Sarah is concerned. This is my final act of protection for them both. This document is to be revealed only if the conditions I fear come to pass. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the old paper. He had known. My quiet, thoughtful David had looked into the future and had seen the shadow of this exact moment. He had tried to protect Sarah from herself, and he had tried to protect me from the pain of knowing he had doubts. But he had died suddenly, of a heart attack. There had been no time for last words, for instructions about a hidden will. This box had sat in the basement, a silent secret, for over a decade. I gathered all the papers and took them upstairs to my living room, my mind reeling. This changed everything. My own will, the one that left everything outright to Sarah, was now null and void in my mind. It was based on an old reality, a relationship that no longer existed. David had provided the blueprint, a trust, controlled distributions, a gatekeeper. But David's will was for his estate, which had become mine. My estate was now my own. I could know. I would honor his intention. I would create a new will of my own, one that reflected the brutal new reality. Clara. I had to tell Clara. I called her, my voice shaky. Clara, you need to come over. Right now. It's important. She was there in 20 minutes. I didn't say a word. I simply handed her the will. She read it in silence, her face impassive. When she finished, she looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and grim vindication. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew," I confirmed, my voice thick with emotion. She set the papers down carefully. "So, what are you going to do?" I looked at my sister. This fierce, uncompromising woman my husband had entrusted with our daughter's future. I thought of Sarah's cruel words. I thought of Mark's smug manipulation. I thought of little Lily, caught in the middle. "I'm going to see a lawyer," I said, my voice clear and strong for the first time in years. "And I'm going to write a will that would make David proud." The discovery in the basement wasn't just an old box of papers. It was a message from beyond the grave, a confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that my pain was valid, and that it was time to stop being soft. It was time to be smart. Sitting in the plush, quiet office of attorney Franklin Reed the following Monday, I felt a surreal sense of calm. The room smelled of lemon polish and old books, a scent that evoked stability and order. Mr. Reed was a man in his late 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a demeanor that was both professional and deeply compassionate. He'd been David's lawyer, and then mine, for 30 years. "Ruth, it's good to see you," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat in the leather chair opposite his massive oak desk. "Though I wish it were under happier circumstances." "So do I, Franklin," I said, setting my purse on the floor beside me. "But circumstances are what they are." I laid it all out for him. I didn't spare a single painful detail. The slow erosion of my relationship with Sarah, the exclusion from Lily's life, the cruel phone call, and finally, I placed David's hidden will on the desk between us. Franklin listened without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath and picked up David's will. He read it carefully, a faint smile touching his lips. David was always a forward thinker. A good man. A wise man. He was. I agreed, my throat tight. Franklin set the will down. "So, you wish to draft a new last will and testament for yourself, modeled on the protective spirit of David's wishes, but tailored to the current situation." "Yes," I said firmly. "I don't want Sarah, or more accurately, Mark, to get their hands on a single cent of my estate, outright, not after the way they've treated me. But I don't want to completely disinherit my granddaughter, Lily. She's innocent in all this." Franklin nodded, making a note on a legal pad. "A common and wise distinction. We can establish a testamentary trust, much like David's, but with more specific conditions. The assets, your home, your investments, your savings would be held and managed by a trustee. They would not belong to Sarah. She would have no control over the principal." "I want Clara to be the trustee," I said, just as David intended. "An excellent choice," Franklin said. "She is formidable and has your best interests and the family's best interests at heart. Now, for the distributions, we can structure them as David did, in increments, or we can tie them to specific conditions." I leaned forward, the plan that had been forming in my mind for weeks, now crystal clear. "I want conditions," I said, "very specific ones." For the next hour, we crafted the legal blueprint for my final act of defiance, my last, powerful lesson. Franklin translated my pain and my resolve into precise, unassailable legal language. The core of the will was this: upon my death, my entire estate would pour into the Lily Mae Trust, named for my granddaughter. Clara would be the sole trustee, with full discretion over all investments and distributions. Sarah would receive nothing directly, not a penny. However, the trust would provide for Lily's health, education, and welfare. Clara could disburse funds for her private school tuition, her medical needs, her extracurricular activities. It would ensure Lily had every opportunity I would have wanted to give her myself. Then came the conditions for Sarah. Firstly, I dictated, my voice steady. Sarah is to receive a monthly stipend from the trust, enough for a modest, lower-middle-class lifestyle. Enough to live on, but not enough for luxury. It is to be paid directly to her, for her personal use, and cannot be commingled with any joint marital assets. Franklin's eyebrows rose, but he wrote it down. That is, unusually specific. It's necessary, I said, my jaw set. Secondly, she is to receive a lump sum distribution of $100,000 on one condition, and one condition only. I took a deep breath. That she provides proof, to the satisfaction of the trustee, Clara, that she has been in ongoing, consistent, and meaningful therapy with a licensed psychologist for a minimum of 2 consecutive years following my death. The pen scratched against the paper. The room was silent except for that sound and the steady tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. Therapy, Franklin repeated, to address the issues of manipulation, financial dependency, and emotional abuse within her marriage. I said, the words clinical but the emotion behind them raw. I want her to get help. I want her to see what's been done to her and what she's done to me. The money is an incentive to do the work. Franklin nodded slowly, a look of deep respect in his eyes. I see. And if she does not meet this condition? Then the money remains in the trust for Lily's future, I said. And finally, the third condition. This was the hardest part. The part that felt both cruel and necessary. The family home, the house David and I built, is not to be sold. It is to be maintained by the trust. Sarah may live in it, if she chooses, but she holds no ownership. Upon her death, or if she chooses not to live there, it passes outright to Lily. And Mark is never, under any circumstances, to be allowed to reside in that home. His name is never to be on the deed. It is a condition of the trust. I sat back, emotionally spent. I had just legally ensured that the man who had orchestrated my exile from my own family would never get his hands on my most precious asset. He would never sit in David's chair, never sleep in our bed, never tear down the walls that held our memories. Franklin finished writing and looked up at me. Ruth, this is a very sophisticated and, if I may say, a brilliantly punitive document. It protects the innocent, provides a path to redemption for the misguided, and places a permanent barrier against the exploiter. It is a masterpiece. A tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. It's not about punishment, Franklin. Not entirely. It's about truth. It's about forcing the truth into the light, even after I'm gone. They said I wasn't special enough to be in their lives. This will prove that my love and my legacy are too special to be left in their hands. I signed the documents then, there, my hand steady. The act felt monumental. It was the single most powerful thing I had ever done. As I walked out of the cool, quiet office into the bright sunshine, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even known I was carrying. The game was over. I had just changed the rules forever, and they had no idea what was coming. The finality of signing the new will left me in a state of emotional whiplash. One moment, I felt a soaring, almost giddy sense of empowerment. The next, I was plunged into a deep, grieving sadness. I had just legally disinherited my only child. What mother does that? The guilt was a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. Grace, of course, was the one to find me sitting in the dark that evening, the sign while sitting on the coffee table like a sleeping viper. Ruthie, she called out softly, flipping on the lamp. She saw my tear-streaked face and the document, and her own eyes filled with sympathy. "Oh, honey, what's wrong? I thought this was what you wanted, to be in control." "It is," I choked out. But it also feels like I'm cutting her out of my heart with a legal document. I'm her mother, Grace. Shouldn't I just forgive? Shouldn't I keep the door open? What if she needs me? Grace sat beside me and took my hand. The door is open, Ruth. It's just that now there's a screen door to keep the snakes out. You're not cutting her out. You're setting boundaries from beyond the grave. There's a difference. She squeezed my fingers. A mother's heart loves unconditionally, but a mother's spirit has to be a warrior sometimes to protect that love from being trampled. You're being a warrior. David would be so proud of you. Her words were a balm. She was right. This wasn't an act of vengeance, it was an act of protection. I was protecting Lily's future from Mark's greed. I was protecting my life's work from being squandered. And in a strange, tough love way, I was even trying to protect Sarah by giving her a brutal, unavoidable mirror to hold up to her own life and choices. The next day, Clara came over. She had already heard from Franklin Reed about the will's contents. She marched into the living room, her expression one of unadulterated triumph. "The therapy clause," she declared, pointing a finger at me. "Ruth, it's genius, absolute genius. You're not just giving her money, you're making her buy a clue." I couldn't help but laugh, a wet, shaky sound. "You don't think it's too cruel?" "Cruel?" Clara scoffed. "Cruel is forgetting your mother's birthday. Cruel is using your own child as a bargaining chip. Cruel is telling the woman who gave you everything that she is in a big, empty house doing nothing. What you've done is not cruel. It's brilliant. You've used their own weapons, money, and control against them, but for a righteous purpose." She picked up the will, holding it with reverence. This is your voice, Ruth. Long after you're gone, this document will speak for you. It will tell Sarah and that husband of hers exactly what you thought of their behavior. It's the truth, written in law. And truth is the one thing manipulators can't stand. Having both my sister's support, from Grace's gentle compassion to Clara's fiery approval, solidified my resolve. The guilt didn't vanish, but it was now accompanied by a solid core of certainty. I had done the right thing. Life settled into a new, quiet rhythm. I started living for myself in a way I hadn't in decades. I joined a book club at the local library. I started taking a gardening class. I even went on a weekend trip with Grace and Clara to a seaside bed and breakfast, something we hadn't done since we were young women. I was rediscovering Ruth, the person, separate from Ruth, the mother. And I was happy, genuinely, quietly happy. The constant ache of rejection was gone. The anxiety of waiting for the next slight had vanished. I was free. Months passed. Seasons changed. The roses David planted bloomed in a spectacular cascade of color, and I cut bouquets for my kitchen, for Grace, for Clara. My life was full in its own way. I thought of Sarah and Lily often, a dull, permanent ache in my heart. I missed my granddaughter with a physical pain. I wondered what new words she was learning, what her laugh sounded like. But I resisted the urge to reach out. The ball was in their court. I had made my position clear when I refused the money. Any reconciliation would have to be initiated by them, and it would have to be sincere. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, the doorbell rang. I was in the kitchen, baking apple pie, the scent of cinnamon and sugar filling the house. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to the door, expecting Grace or a package delivery. I opened the door and my heart stopped. It was Sarah. She stood on my porch, alone. She looked different. Thinner, paler, the polished, effortless beauty was replaced by a strained weariness. Her eyes, which had been so cold and hard on the phone, were red-rimmed and full of a desperate uncertainty. She was holding a small, gift-wrapped box. "Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. For a long moment we just stared at each other, the chasm of the past year stretching between us on the welcome mat. "Sarah," I finally managed. "What are you doing here?" She swallowed hard, her eyes dropping to the box in her hands. I brought you something for your birthday. I know it's months late. I'm so sorry." She held out the gift. I didn't take it. I just looked at her, my guard up, my heart a conflicted mess of hope and suspicion. "Why now, Sarah?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. A tear escaped and traced a path through her light makeup. "Because I miss you, Mom." Her voice broke on the last word. "And because things aren't good." The confession hung in the air between us. It wasn't the full-throated apology I craved. It wasn't an admission of her cruelty or Mark's manipulation. But it was a crack. A tiny fissure in the wall they had built. My mother's heart screamed at me to pull her into my arms, to tell her everything was all right, to usher her inside and feed her apple pie and make the bad things go away. But the warrior's spirit that had been forged in fire held me back. I looked at my daughter, standing broken on my porch, and I knew this was a test. The first of many. I stepped back, holding the door open wider. "You'd better come in," I said. "The pie is almost done." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. It was a beginning. Sarah stepped into the house as if she were walking on ice, her eyes darting around, taking in the familiar surroundings that had become foreign to her. The smell of baking pie seemed to confuse her, as if she'd expected the place to smell of dust and despair, not cinnamon and warmth. I led her to the kitchen and gestured for her to sit at the table. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. I was playing a role now, the gracious but distant hostess. It felt strange, acting this way with my own child, but the old intimacy was gone, replaced by a minefield of unsaid things. "Yes, please," she said, setting the small, wrapped box on the table. She watched me as I moved around the kitchen, filling the kettle, getting out cups. The silence was thick and uncomfortable. "How is Lily?" I asked, my back to her, as I placed tea bags in the pot. It was the safest question, the one that carried the least baggage, yet it was laden with all my unspoken longing. "She's good. She's talking so much now. She asks about you sometimes." The words were a hook, expertly baited, and they sank deep into my heart. "She asks about you." I had to close my eyes for a second, steadying myself against the counter. "Don't take the bait, Ruth. Not yet." "I'm glad she's well," I said, turning around, my face a polite mask. "I think of her every day." The kettle whistled, a shrill sound that broke the tension. I poured the water and brought the teapot and cups to the table. I sat down opposite her, the wrapped gift sitting between us like a silent judge. "Aren't you going to open it?" Sarah asked, nodding toward the box. "In a moment," I said, pouring the tea. "First, tell me why you're really here, Sarah." She flinched, as if I'd slapped her. The directness was not what she'd expected. The old me would have tiptoed around, afraid of scaring her away. The new me needed to see the truth. "I told you," she said, her voice trembling. "I miss you. I'm sorry about your birthday. I'm sorry about the phone call. I was stressed. The house hunt was falling through, and Mark was putting so much pressure on me." There it was. The excuse. The deflection of blame onto Mark and stress. "It wasn't. I was wrong to speak to you that way." "It was. I was stressed." "I see," I said, taking a slow sip of my tea. "And the things you said? That I sit here doing nothing? That I'm hoarding my money? That Mark was right about me?" I held her gaze, forcing her to look at me. "Were you stressed when you said those things, too?" Her face crumpled. She looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. I didn't mean them, Mom. I was just angry. He gets in my head. He tells me things, and after a while, I start to believe them. It was the closest I'd gotten to an admission. A tiny sliver of truth. But it was still framed as her being a victim of Mark's influence, not as her being an active participant in my mistreatment. "What kinds of things does he tell you, Sarah?" I asked, my voice soft but relentless. She shook her head, tears falling freely now. "That you're controlling, that you use money to manipulate me, that you're jealous of our life, that you never really approved of him." She looked up, her eyes pleading. "He said if you really loved me, you'd want to help us without question. That your refusal to help with the house proved he was right." I listened, my heart breaking and hardening simultaneously. It was all so transparent. He was a classic abuser, isolating her from her support system by painting me as the villain. And she, wanting to believe in the fairy tale she'd built with him, had allowed it to happen. "And what do you believe, Sarah?" I asked quietly. "Do you believe I'm a controlling, jealous woman who doesn't love you?" She was silent for a long time, the only sound her ragged breathing. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she finally whispered. "Everything is so messed up." It was an honest answer, perhaps the most honest she'd been in years. The calculated part of her apology was fading, revealing the genuinely lost and confused woman beneath. "Open your gift, Mom," she said, pushing the box toward me, a desperate attempt to change the subject, to inject a moment of normalcy. I slowly untied the ribbon and tore off the paper. Inside was a small velvet box. I opened it. Nestled inside was a beautiful silver locket. It was exactly the kind of thing I would have loved. A peace offering, carefully chosen. "It's beautiful, Sarah. Thank you," I said, my voice flat. I didn't put it on. Her face fell. She had expected a different reaction. Tears, a hug, an immediate reconciliation. She had brought a gift, she had said sorry, and she expected the slate to be wiped clean. "The pie should be cool enough to cut," I said, standing up. "Would you like a slice?" I served us both pie, the sweet, spiced, filling a stark contrast to the bitter conversation. We ate in silence for a few minutes. "Things aren't good, Mom," she repeated, her voice small. "With me and Mark, we fight all the time. About money. About everything." I nodded, saying nothing. I wouldn't give her advice. I wouldn't tell her to leave him. Anything I said would be used against me, twisted and reported back to him. I was a sanctuary now, a neutral ground, but I would not be a player in their marital drama. "What are you going to do about it?" I asked instead. "I don't know." She sighed, pushing her pie around her plate. I needed to see you. I needed to know that you were still here." "I've always been here, Sarah," I said, my voice finally softening with a genuine, aching sadness. "You're the one who left." She started to cry in earnest, then, deep, shoulder-shaking sobs. I didn't go to her. I let her cry. She needed to feel the full weight of what she had done. The calculated apology was over. Now, the real work was beginning. The work of facing the consequences. She stayed for another hour, the conversation stumbling toward safer topics: her job, a movie she'd seen. The ease was gone, but a tenuous connection had been re-established. When she left, she hugged me at the door, a tight, desperate clutch. "I'll call you, Mom," she promised. "I'd like that," I said. I closed the door and leaned against it, emotionally exhausted. I looked down at the silver locket in my hand. It was a beautiful, empty gesture, a bribe. A tool to assuage her own guilt and secure what they still thought was their future inheritance. I walked to my jewelry box and placed the locket inside, next to the simple gold band I still wore from David. It would stay there, a shiny reminder of a broken relationship. The apology had been calculated, but my response had been strategic. The game was still on. But for the first time, I felt like I was winning. Sarah's visit left me emotionally raw, like a wound that had been scabbed over had been torn open again. The sight of her, so weary and lost, haunted me. The mother in me wanted to charge in, to rescue her from whatever unhappiness she was trapped in. But the warrior, the woman who had signed a will designed to protect herself from exactly this kind of emotional manipulation, held me back. She did call, just as she'd promised. The conversations were stilted at first, full of long pauses and careful topics. We talked about the weather, about a book I was reading, about a new recipe she'd tried. It was the conversational equivalent of two people gingerly testing the ice on a frozen pond, afraid it would crack beneath them at any moment. But slowly, tentatively, she began to let little things slip. Whispers of doubt about the life she had built. It started about 2 weeks after her visit. She called, her voice tight. "Mom, you remember the Jacobs? Our neighbors from the old condo." "Of course," I said. "Lovely people. They're getting a divorce," she said, and there was a strange, envious note in her voice. Janet just left. She packed a bag, took the kids, and went to her sister's. She said she'd had enough. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my senses on high alert. This wasn't just gossip. This was a probe. "Mark says she's selfish," Sarah continued, almost as if talking to herself. "That she's breaking up her family over feelings. That a marriage is about sticking it out through good times and bad." "And what do you think?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. There was a long silence. "I don't know," she whispered. Sometimes the bad times feel like they're the only times." My heart ached for her. It was the first time she had openly criticized the facade of her marriage. I said nothing, just let the silence hang, a safe space for her confession. Another time, she called, furious. "He did it again. He went and bought a new set of golf clubs. $1,000. And he had the nerve to tell me we need to cut back on the grocery bill. I'm supposed to feed Lily. Organic everything, but he can drop $1,000 on a hobby he barely has time for." I listened to her vent, my mind working. The financial control was a classic tactic. Make her feel financially dependent and incompetent, then splurge on himself to reinforce his power. "It must be frustrating to feel like your concerns aren't being heard," I said, carefully reflecting her feeling without offering advice. "You have no idea," she sighed, the anger deflating into exhaustion. "It's like talking to a wall. He just twists everything. He'll say he works hard and deserves a treat, and that I should be more supportive. And if I push, he'll get cold and silent for days. It's just easier to let it go. Easier to let it go." How many times had I said that to myself about her behavior toward me? The cycle was repeating itself, a generational echo of swallowed pain. The most telling call came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Her voice was small, childlike. "Mom? Do you remember when I was little and I had that really bad dream about the monster in the closet?" "I do," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "You were about 5. You were terrified. And you didn't just tell me it wasn't real," she continued, her voice thick with tears. "You sat with me on the bed and you said, 'Let's talk to the monster. Let's ask him what he wants.' And we decided he was just lonely and wanted a friend, and you helped me leave a little cup of water and a cracker by the closet door for him." I remembered it vividly. The way her small body had relaxed against mine, the trust in her eyes. "The monster never came back after that, did he?" I said softly. "No," she whispered. "Because you gave me a way to not be afraid. You didn't dismiss me. You empowered me." The line was silent for a moment, filled only with the sound of her crying. I feel like there's a monster in my closet now, Mom. And I'm so scared. And no one is helping me talk to it. Everyone is just telling me to ignore it, or that it's not there, or that it's my fault for leaving the closet door open. Tears streamed down my face. This was my little girl, trapped and terrified. The calculated apology was gone. This was a cry for help from the daughter I thought I'd lost. But still, I held my ground. I couldn't rush in. If I did, I would become the meddling mother-in-law, the one trying to break up her marriage. Mark would use it to drive us apart again. I had to let her come to her own realizations. "Oh, Sarah," I said, my voice breaking. "I am so sorry you're feeling so afraid. You are so strong, so much stronger than you know, and you will find a way to talk to the monster." "I know you will." It was all I could give her, my belief in her. Not a solution, not a rescue, but my unwavering faith that she possessed the strength she needed, the same strength I had to find within myself. When we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The whispers of doubt she was sharing were the first signs of the foundation cracking. My new will was the earthquake that was coming. It would either shatter her world completely, or it would be the catalyst that finally gave her the courage to face the monster in her closet. I had set the stage. Now, I had to wait for the play to unfold. The months that followed Sarah's tearful confession about the monster in the closet were a period of strange, suspended animation. Our phone calls became more frequent, more substantial. The careful small talk gave way to real conversations. She started asking for my opinion on things not about her marriage, never about Mark directly, but about work dilemmas, about parenting questions regarding Lily. It was as if she was slowly, tentatively, rebuilding the bridge she had burned. She even brought Lily over for a visit. The day my granddaughter stepped back into my home, her little hand clutching her mother's, was one of the most profound of my life. She was 3 years old now, a tiny, vibrant person with Sarah's curly hair and David's thoughtful blue eyes. She looked around my living room with wide-eyed curiosity, no memory of the last time she'd been here. "This is Grandma's house, Lily," Sarah said, her voice soft. Lily looked at me, then buried her face in Sarah's leg. My heart squeezed, but I didn't push. I just sat on the floor and started building a tower with some of the old wooden blocks I'd saved from Sarah's childhood. Slowly, cautiously, Lily crept over and knocked the tower down with a giggle. And just like that, the ice was broken. We spent the afternoon on the floor, building and knocking down towers, reading picture books, and eating the sugar cookies I'd baked that morning. Sarah watched us, a sad, complicated smile on her face. I could see the war in her eyes, the joy of seeing her daughter with her mother, and the guilt over the time that had been stolen. When they left, Lily gave me a spontaneous, sticky hug. "Bye, Gamma," she mumbled into my shirt. I held her tiny body, breathing in the sweet, little girl scent of her, and felt a piece of my shattered heart click back into place. "Goodbye, my sweet girl," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. After that, visits became a semi-regular occurrence. Sometimes Sarah would come alone, for a cup of tea and a venting session about work or the frustrations of motherhood. The mentions of Mark became less frequent, and when they did come up, they were tinged with a new weariness, a resignation that was somehow more alarming than her previous anger. I never invited them for holidays. I didn't want the pressure, the potential for a scene if Mark decided to come. My home had become a sanctuary for Sarah and Lily, a Mark-free zone, and I intended to keep it that way. During this time, I lived my life. I thrived in my book club. My garden won a Yard of the Month award from the Time. Local garden society. I went on another trip with my sisters. I was happy. Truly, contentedly happy. The constant gnawing pain of my estrangement from Sarah had faded to a manageable ache, a scar instead of an open wound. But I was not naive. I knew this was the calm before the storm. The peace was fragile, built on the unsteady foundation of Sarah's crumbling marriage and her tentative reach toward me. I had the profound sense that I was standing on the beach, admiring the beautiful, receding tide, knowing a tsunami was gathering force just beyond the horizon. The trigger came on a bright spring morning. I was out in the garden, weeding my flower beds, when my phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice was frantic, panicked. "Mom, are you home?" "I'm in the garden, honey." "What's wrong?" "I'm coming over. Right now. I have Lily. I just need to come over." "Of course," I said, my own pulse quickening. "Come straight here. Is everything all right? Are you safe?" "I'm safe," she said, but her voice was trembling. "I'll explain when I get there." 20 minutes later, her car screeched to a halt in my driveway. She practically fell out of the driver's seat, her face pale and streaked with tears. She unbuckled a sleepy-looking Lily from her car seat and hurried up the walk, clutching her daughter like a lifeline. I ushered them inside. Lily, sensing her mother's distress, began to whimper. "What happened, Sarah?" I asked, guiding her to the couch. She sank into the cushions, holding Lily close. "We had a huge fight, the biggest one yet." She took a shuddering breath. He lost his job. "Weeks ago. He didn't tell me." I stared at her, stunned. "Weeks ago? But how?" "He's been pretending to go to work every day," she cried, her voice rising with hysteria. "He'd leave in the morning, in his suit, and spend the day God knows where. Probably the golf course, and then he'd come home and complain about his hectic day. We're months behind on the mortgage. The credit cards are maxed out. He's been draining our savings to keep up the charade." The sheer audacity of the lie took my breath away. The level of deception was staggering. "I found out because the bank called," she sobbed. "A foreclosure notice. He'd been hiding the mail. I confronted him, and he blew up. He said it was my fault for pressuring him to provide a certain lifestyle. He said if I hadn't been so obsessed with a big house and nice things, he wouldn't have felt the need to keep up appearances. He blamed me." Lily started crying in earnest now, frightened by her mother's tears. I took her from Sarah's arms and held her, rocking her gently. "Shush, sweetheart, it's okay. Grandma's here." I looked at my daughter, broken and betrayed on my couch. The monster was out of the closet now. It had a face, and it was the face of the man she had vowed to spend her life with. "What are you going to do?" I asked, the question hanging in the air between us. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terror I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. "I don't know," she whispered. "I have nowhere to go." The calm was over. The storm had made landfall. And as I held my trembling granddaughter in my arms, I knew the next move was mine. The sight of my daughter and granddaughter, huddled together on my couch like survivors of a shipwreck, ignited a ferocious, primal protectiveness in me. All the strategic distance, the careful neutrality, evaporated in the face of their raw, immediate need. "You have somewhere to go," I said, my voice firm and clear, cutting through Sarah's sobs. "You are here. This is your home. It has always been your home." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes full of a desperate, disbelieving hope. "But, Mark is not welcome here," I stated, in a tone that brooked no argument. It was the same tone I'd used when she was 16 and wanted to borrow the car for a road trip I deemed too dangerous. "This is my house, my rules, and he will not set foot in it." The finality in my voice seemed to calm her. It was a boundary, a wall of safety I was building around her. For the first time in years, someone was saying no to Mark on her behalf. "Now," I said, shifting and now sleeping Lily in my arms. The first thing we are going to do is get Lily settled. Then, you and I are going to talk. I led Sarah upstairs to the guest room, the room that had been hers as a teenager. I had kept it largely the same, a time capsule of her youth. The lavender walls, the bulletin board, still pinned with faded concert tickets and photos of her high school friends. She looked around, a fresh wave of tears welling in her eyes, but these seemed to be tears of poignant recognition. "It's just like I left it," she whispered. "I always hoped you'd come back to it," I said softly. We settled Lily into the old twin bed, tucking my childhood quilt around her. She sighed in her sleep, her little face finally peaceful. Downstairs in the kitchen, I made Sarah a strong cup of sweet tea, the way David used to make for me when I was upset. We sat at the table, the same table where we'd had so many meals, so many conversations, a lifetime ago. "Okay," I said, taking her hand. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." And she did. The story poured out of her in a torrent of pain and shame. The slow realization that Mark was irresponsible with money. The way he'd belittle her concerns, calling her bad with numbers and hysterical. The secret credit cards he'd opened in her name. The lies about his job, a performance he'd maintained for weeks, leaving the house each morning with a briefcase and a kiss, living a complete double life. "He said I drove him to it," she repeated, her voice hollow, "that my expectations were too high, that I wanted a life he couldn't give me." "Sarah," I said, squeezing her hand, "look at me. This is not your fault. You are not responsible for his lies or his choices. He is a grown man. He chose to deceive you, to blame you, rather than face the truth and work with you as a partner." She nodded slowly, as if trying to absorb a concept that was foreign to her. For years, her reality had been defined by his distortions. It would take time to recalibrate. "What do you want to do?" I asked. It was the most important question. "I want to leave him," she whispered, the words a secret she was finally admitting to herself. "But I'm scared. I have no money of my own. He controls everything. I have a job, but my paycheck goes into our joint account, and he moves it. I have nothing." The financial abuse was complete. He had made her entirely dependent, then pulled the rug out from under her. "You have me," I said, "and you have this house. You and Lily can stay here as long as you need to. Forever, if you want. We will get you a lawyer. We will freeze your credit. We will untangle this mess, one string at a time. You are not alone in this." The relief that washed over her face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. It was the look of a prisoner seeing the sunlight after years in a dark cell. "Thank you, Mom," she sobbed, collapsing into my arms. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." I held her as she cried, all the pain and regret of the past few years pouring out of her. This wasn't a calculated apology. This was a surrender, a breaking. And from this broken place, I knew we could begin to rebuild. That night, as Sarah and Lily slept safely under my roof, I lay awake in my own bed, staring at the ceiling. The storm had arrived, and it had been even more destructive than I'd imagined. But my house was strong. Its foundations, built on love and hard work, had held. The game had changed dramatically. Sarah was no longer the adversary. She was a victim, and she was back in my care. My will, with its punitive clauses and its forced therapy, suddenly felt different. It had been designed for the woman she was complicit, cruel, entitled. But what about the woman she was becoming, broken, repentant, seeking refuge? I thought of the therapy clause. She needed therapy now more than ever. But the $100,000 incentive felt crass, given the circumstances. A new idea began to form in my mind, a modification. The core of the will, the trust for Lily, the disinheritance of Mark, the protection of the house that was non-negotiable. But the path for Sarah. Perhaps that could be a path of healing, not just punishment. The next morning, I called Franklin Reed. "Franklin," I said, watching Sarah and Lily eating pancakes at my kitchen table, a scene of domestic peace I had dreamed of for years, "I need to make a codicil to my will." The sanctuary had been opened. The battle for my daughter's soul was underway, and I was preparing for the final, most important phase of the war. Sitting once again in Franklin Reed's office, the world outside his window looked the same, but I was a different woman. The last time I was here, I was armed with righteous anger and a heart shielded by resolve. Today, I carried the weight of my daughter's brokenness and a fragile, burgeoning hope. "Ruth," Franklin greeted me, his eyes kind but curious. "You said it was about a codicil? Has something changed?" "Everything has changed, Franklin," I said, settling into the familiar leather chair. "And nothing has changed." I told him about Sarah's return, the devastating truth about Mark's deception and their financial ruin, her genuine remorse and her decision to leave him. I told him about the frightened, lost woman now sleeping in her childhood bedroom and the sweet granddaughter who called me Gamma. Franklin listened, steepling his fingers. "I see. So, you wish to revoke the new will and reinstate the old one. To leave everything to Sarah outright." "No," I said firmly. "Absolutely not." He looked surprised. "No. The threats haven't changed, Franklin," I explained. "Mark is still out there. He is still manipulative, still greedy. If I die tomorrow and Sarah inherits everything outright, he will swoop in. He'll love bomb her, manipulate her guilt, promise to change. And in her vulnerable state, she might take him back. And then, everything David and I worked for would be in his hands. The house would be sold. The money would be squandered. Lily's future would be jeopardized. The protective structure of the trust is more important now than ever." Franklin nodded, understanding dawning. "So, the trust remains. Clara remains the trustee. The conditions regarding the house and Mark's exclusion stand." "Yes," I said, "but the conditions for Sarah, they need to reflect the new reality." I took a deep breath, outlining the new idea that had come to me in the quiet of the night. I want to modify the therapy clause. The requirement for 2 years of therapy remains. It's not a punishment anymore. It's a prerequisite for her healing. She needs it desperately. "But the $100,000 distribution," Franklin prompted. "I want to change its purpose," I said. "Instead of it being a lump sum reward for completing therapy, I want it to be designated as a fresh start fund. The money can be used at Clara's discretion for specific, empowering things. A down payment on a small home in her name only. Tuition for her to go back to school and further her career, or to start a business. It's not just cash for her to spend. It's a tool for her to build an independent life, separate from Mark." A slow smile spread across Franklin's face. "Ruth, that is, extraordinarily wise. You're not just giving her money, you're investing in her autonomy. There's one more thing," I added, my voice softening. "The monthly stipend, the one designed to be modest. I want to increase it, significantly. Enough that she can live comfortably, not just get by. She's going to be a single mother. She'll need financial breathing room to focus on healing herself and raising Lily. I don't want her to struggle. I want her to thrive." Franklin made the notes, the scratch of his pen the only sound in the room for a moment. "This is a remarkable shift, Ruth. From a will designed to punish and reveal truth, to one designed to heal and empower." "The truth has already been revealed," I said quietly. "She's living it. Now, my last act should be to help her pick up the pieces." We drafted the codicil, the formal amendment to my will. It was a shorter document, but its implications were profound. It transformed my final message from one of condemnation into one of tough, structured, but undeniable love. When I returned home, Sarah was in the garden, watching Lily chase a butterfly. The sight was so normal, so peaceful, it made my heart ache. She looked up as I approached, her eyes still shadowed but clearer than they had been in days. "Where'd you go, Mom?" she asked. "I had an appointment," I said, which wasn't a lie. I sat on the bench next to her. "How are you feeling?" "Overwhelmed," she admitted. "But safe." "For the first time in a long time, I feel safe." She looked at me, her expression grateful but pained. "I don't deserve this. After how I treated you, I don't deserve your kindness." "Love isn't about deserve, Sarah," I said, echoing the words Grace had often said to me. "It's about choice. I choose to love you. I choose to help you. Always." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat in silence, watching Lily's unbridled joy. The past was a dark cloud behind us, but the future was still unwritten. I had created a legal blueprint for that future. A future where Sarah could find her strength, where Lily was protected, and where Mark's poisonous influence was permanently barred. The codicil was not a sign of weakness. It was an act of supreme strength. It meant I had not let their betrayal harden my heart completely. I had found a way to be both a warrior and a mother, right to the very end. The final piece was in place. Now, we had to live. The weeks following Sarah's return were a whirlwind of practical chaos and profound emotional adjustment. The first and most urgent order of business was dealing with the immediate fallout from Mark. True to his character, he didn't take Sarah's departure lying down. The calls started almost immediately, first pleading, then angry, then threatening. He showed up at the house once, pounding on the door and demanding to see his daughter and wife. I didn't open the door. I stood behind it, my heart hammering, and called the police. Seeing the cruiser pull up sent him scurrying away, but the message was clear. He wasn't going to disappear quietly. We hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Angela Moss, who specialized in high-conflict divorces and financial fraud. With her guidance, Sarah filed for divorce and a restraining order. We froze her credit, opened a new bank account in her name only, and began the painstaking process of untangling the financial web Mark had woven. It was during this process that the full extent of his deception was revealed. The debt was staggering. He had not only lost his job but had been gambling, taking out high-interest loans to cover his losses, using their home equity as collateral. They were not just in danger of losing their house, they were drowning in a sea of debt. Sarah was devastated, but also, for the first time, truly furious. The veil had been completely lifted. She saw him for the pathological liar and manipulator he was. Her grief began to transform into a steely determination to protect herself and her daughter. Meanwhile, life inside my home settled into a new, vibrant routine. The big, empty house was now filled with the sounds of life. Lily's laughter, the chatter of the television, the smell of whatever Sarah was experimenting with for dinner. It was chaotic and messy and utterly wonderful. I watched my daughter slowly begin to transform. Freed from the constant criticism and gaslighting, her true personality began to re-emerge. She laughed more easily. She started making decisions for herself, small ones at first, like what to make for dinner, then bigger ones, like meeting with the divorce lawyer on her own. She was reclaiming her agency, piece by piece. She also started therapy, of her own volition. She didn't know about the clause in my will. She did it because she recognized the deep scars the relationship had left. She needed to understand why she had allowed it to happen, how she had become so isolated from the woman who had raised her. One evening, after she'd put Lily to bed, she came into the living room where I was reading. She sat on the opposite end of the couch, tucking her feet under her. "My therapist said something today that, well, it hit me hard," she began, her voice tentative. I put my book down. "What was it?" She said that often, people who are manipulated come from backgrounds where love was conditional, where they had to earn it. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Was your love for me conditional, Mom?" The question was a knife to the heart, but it was a necessary one. "Oh, Sarah," I said, my voice thick. "No, never. My love for you was, and is, the most unconditional thing in my life. But perhaps my approval was conditional." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I was so proud of you, so invested in your success, your good grades, your achievements. I celebrated them so fiercely. Maybe, without meaning to, I gave you the message that you had to achieve to be worthy of celebration. And when you met Mark, he was an achievement. Handsome, successful, charming. And I admit, I had doubts from the beginning. A mother's intuition. But I didn't want to be the critical mother, the one who couldn't be happy for her daughter. So I swallowed my doubts. I gave my approval, even when I didn't feel it. And when things started to go wrong, you were so desperate to prove that your achievement was valid, that you'd made the right choice, that you shut out anyone who questioned it, especially me." Tears welled in her eyes as she processed this. "So you think I stayed with him because I was trying to prove I'd made a good choice? To you? To myself?" "I think it was a part of it," I said gently. "You're a smart woman, Sarah. You knew on some level that it was wrong, but admitting that would have felt like a failure. And I had, unintentionally, made you afraid of failure." It was a painful, searingly honest conversation. There was no villain, no saint. Just a mother and a daughter, trying to understand the complex tapestry of their relationship, woven with threads of deep love and unintended pressure. It was a breakthrough. For the first time, we weren't just talking about what Mark had done. We were talking about why it had worked. We were healing the root, not just pruning the branches. Living in the aftermath of the storm was not easy. There were bad days, days when Sarah was consumed with anger or fear, days when the weight of the debt felt insurmountable. But there were more good days. Days of laughter, of shared meals, of watching Lily grow. I was living the life I had longed for. It had come at a terrible cost, but it was here. And as I watched my daughter slowly, painstakingly rebuild herself, I knew that no matter what happened, the legacy I was leaving wasn't just in a legal document. It was in this house, in this family, reborn from the ashes. The will was my silent sentinel, guarding the future. But the present, this messy, beautiful, healing present, was my greatest reward. Chapter 13. The diagnosis word count, 3017. The human body has a way of storing stress, of absorbing the silent tremors of a breaking heart and a tormented mind, and converting them into something physical. For months, I had been running on a strange mixture of adrenaline, resolve, and the sheer joy of having my family back. I felt invincible. The warrior spirit that had carried me through the betrayal and empowered me to rewrite my will was still coursing through me. But warriors are mortal. It started with a fatigue that coffee couldn't fix, a deep, bone-weary tiredness that would descend in the middle of the day. I chalked it up to the new, busy household, to the emotional energy I was pouring into Sarah and Lily. Then came the pain, a persistent, dull ache in my lower back that I attributed to gardening or lifting Lily. I kept it to myself. Sarah had enough on her plate. She was navigating a brutal divorce, starting a new job, and going to therapy. She didn't need to worry about her mother's aches and pains. But Grace noticed. "You're moving slowly, Ruthie," she said one afternoon, watching me wince as I bent to pick up one of Lily's toys. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," I insisted, forcing a smile. "Just getting old." Clara, of course, was less easily dismissed. She cornered me in the kitchen a few days later. "Don't give me that getting old nonsense. You've been vibrant for months. Now you look pale. You're losing weight. When was the last time you saw a doctor?" "I'm due for a checkup," I evaded. "I'll make an appointment." I did make the appointment, more to get Clara off my back than out of any real concern. I saw my longtime physician, Dr. Evans, a cheerful man in his 50s who had seen me through everything from Sarah's birth to David's death. He went through the routine, his demeanor light. Then he felt my abdomen during the exam. His expression changed. It was subtle, a slight tightening around his eyes, but I saw it. The cheerful banter stopped. "Ruth," he said, his voice becoming measured, "I'm feeling a mass. It's likely nothing, but I'd like to send you for an ultrasound, just to be thorough." The word mass landed in the quiet room with the force of a bomb. The world seemed to slow down. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The ultrasound led to a CT scan. The CT scan led to a biopsy. And then there was the waiting. The agonizing, soul-crushing waiting. I went through the motions of my life, baking with Lily, talking with Sarah, weeding the garden, but my mind was in a sterile, white room, waiting for a verdict. I told no one. Not yet. I couldn't burden Sarah. I couldn't bear the pity in Grace's eyes or the frantic, problem-solving energy I knew would come from Clara. This was my burden to carry, at least until I knew its shape and weight. A week later, I sat in Dr. Evans's office again, but this time, his nurse led me to his private consultation room, not an exam room. I knew what that meant. My hands were ice cold. Dr. Evans came in, his face grave. He sat down opposite me and didn't mince words. "Ruth, I'm so sorry. The biopsy confirmed it. It's pancreatic cancer." The air left my lungs. The room tilted. Cancer. The big C. The word that strikes fear into the heart of every person who hears it. Pancreatic. I repeated, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "It's an aggressive form," he continued gently. "Given its size and location, I'm afraid it's stage 4. It's spread to your liver. Stage 4, there is no stage 5. He talked about treatment options, chemotherapy, radiation, but his words were muted, as if he were speaking to me from the other end of a long tunnel. He used phrases like palliative care and quality of life. He was talking about managing the end, not fighting for a cure. I heard myself asking questions, my voice surprisingly calm. About timelines, about pain management, about what to expect. "It's difficult to say, for certain," he said, his eyes full of compassion. "But without aggressive treatment, perhaps 6 months. With treatment, maybe a year, maybe a little more. But the treatment itself can be very difficult." I thanked him, took the pamphlets he offered, and walked out of the office in a daze. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, the engine off, the silence absolute. 6 months. A year. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. The hands that had held my baby girl, that had cooked countless meals, that had planted a garden, that had signed a will that would now, suddenly, become very relevant. My first emotion was not fear for myself. It was a fierce, blazing panic for Sarah and Lily. They had just found their way back to me. They were just beginning to heal. How could I leave them now? The cruelty of the timing was breathtaking. Then, a strange calm began to settle over me. The same calm I had felt when I decided to rewrite my will. The calm of certainty. The waiting was over. I knew the enemy now. I knew its name and its timeline. I started the car and drove home. I walked into my house, which was filled with the sound of Sarah singing to Lily in the living room. I stood in the doorway and watched them, memorizing the scene. The way the afternoon light fell on Sarah's hair, the sound of Lily's giggle, the sheer ordinary beauty of it. Sarah looked up and saw me. Her smile faded. "Mom, are you okay? You look pale." I walked into the room and sat down beside her. I took her hand in mine. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, my eyes holding hers. "We need to talk." The war was over. A new final battle was beginning. Telling Sarah my diagnosis was the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than losing David, harder than down. Hearing her cruel words on the phone. This was delivering a pain directly to her, a pain from which I could not shield her. I led with the facts, just as Dr. Evans had with me. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. I watched the words land, saw the color drain from her face, the confusion in her eyes as her brain tried to reject the information. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible. You're fine. You're here." "I am here," I said, squeezing her hand. "And I will be for a while longer, but not forever." The dam broke then. She collapsed against me, sobbing with a raw, guttural pain that came from a place deeper than I knew existed. It was the sound of a child facing the loss of her parent, amplified by the years of separation and the fresh, fragile state of our reconciliation. "I just got you back," she cried over and over. "I can't lose you. I can't. It's not fair." I held her, rocking her as she had so often rocked Lily. There were no words that could comfort her, so I didn't try. I just let her grieve. When her sobs subsided into hiccuping breaths, I spoke again, my voice soft but firm. "Listen to me, Sarah. We are not going to spend whatever time we have left drowning in sorrow. We are going to live. Every single day, we are going to make memories with Lily. We are going to talk, really talk, and we are going to be prepared." The word prepared caught her attention. She pulled back, wiping her tear-streaked face. "Prepared? What do you mean?" This was the moment. The time for secrets was over. "There are things you need to know," I said. "About the house, about my finances, about my will." A flicker of something guilt crossed her face. "Mom, you don't have to. I do," I insisted. "It's important, and I need you to hear it from me." I told her everything. I started from the beginning, with the pain of the exclusion, the cruel phone call, the discovery of David's hidden will. I didn't spare her feelings. I described the depth of my hurt, the moment I realized I was being financially exploited, the cold resolve that led me to Franklin Reed's office. She listened, her face a mask of growing horror and remorse. She heard about the original will I had written, the trust for Lily, the therapy clause, the ban on Mark ever setting foot in this house. You disinherited me?" she whispered, the words barely audible. "I protected you," I corrected her gently. "I protected Lily. I built a fortress around my legacy to keep the wolf from the door. The wolf being Mark." I then told her about the codicil, the change I had made after she came back to me, the Fresh Start Fund, the increased stipend, the shift from punishment to empowerment. By the time I finished, she was weeping again, but this time it was a quiet, cleansing rain. "You did all that after how I treated you. You were still trying to take care of me." "A mother's job is never done," I said, a small, sad smile on my lips. "Even from the grave, apparently." She threw her arms around me, holding me tighter than she ever had before. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for all of it, for every horrible thing I said, for every time I made you feel small. I was so blind, so stupid. You were manipulated," I said, stroking her hair. "And you found your way back. That's all that matters now." Telling Grace and Clara was its own particular kind of heartbreak. Grace crumpled, her gentle spirit shattered by the news. She held my hands and prayed, her tears falling on our clasped fingers. Clara was furious. Furious at the disease, at the unfairness, at the universe. She wanted to fight, to find specialists, to try experimental treatments. She was my warrior sister, ready to charge into battle. I had to calm her. Clara, the battle isn't for a cure. The battle is for a good ending, a peaceful one, and you have a crucial role to play in that. I reminded her of the will, of her duty as trustee. I gave her a copy and walked her through it. I saw the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders, and with it, a sense of purpose that tempered her fury. "I will protect them, Ruth," she vowed, her voice gruff with emotion. "With my last breath, I will protect them from that man. I swear it." With the truth spoken and my inner circle fortified, I began the work of dying. It is a peculiar thing to plan your own departure. I made lists of accounts and passwords for Clara. I wrote letters to Lily for her to open on future birthdays. I sorted through my belongings, deciding what should go to whom. But mostly, I lived. Sarah and I talked for hours. We watched old home movies, laughing and crying at the images of a life that felt both a million years ago and just like yesterday. We took Lily to the zoo, to the park, on picnics. I baked cookies and read stories and soaked in every precious, ordinary moment. The cancer was a shadow, always there, growing slowly. The pain increased, and I began taking medication to manage it. The fatigue became a constant companion, but I refused to let it steal my joy. I was living my ending on my own terms. Surrounded by love, having mended the most important relationship of my life, and with the absolute certainty that my family was protected. The truth had been spoken, not in anger, but in love. And it had set us all free. As the autumn leaves began to turn, painting the world in fiery hues of red and gold, I could feel my own internal landscape shifting. The energy that had sustained me through the summer was waning, the boundaries of my world slowly contracting from the entire town, to my garden, to the main floor of the house, and finally, for the last few weeks, largely to my bedroom. The hospice nurse, a wonderfully kind woman named Betty, came daily. She managed my pain with a gentle efficiency, allowing me to be present and lucid for the moments that mattered. The house was quiet now, a hushed, peaceful space filled with soft light and the scent of the lavender sachets Grace made for my pillows. Sarah had moved a cot into my room, refusing to let me spend a night alone. We would talk late into the night, our voices soft in the darkness. We said everything that needed to be said. There were no more unsolved mysteries between us, no unspoken apologies. It was a time of profound, aching sweetness. I knew the end was drawing near. I could feel it, a subtle pulling away, a lessening of my grip on the world. And I knew what I wanted. One last gathering. Not a somber deathbed vigil, but a celebration. I asked for Grace, Clara, Sarah, and Lily to come to my room. It was a bright, crisp afternoon, the sun streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. They filed in their faces a mixture of love and sorrow. Grace carried a tray with a pot of tea and my favorite china cups. Clara held a stack of photo albums. Sarah carried Lily, who was clutching the worn stuffed elephant I had bought for her so long ago, the one that had sat in its bag in the guest room until she'd claimed it as her own. They arranged themselves around the room, Grace in the armchair, Clara perched stiffly on a straight-back chair, Sarah on the edge of my bed with Lily on her lap. We must have looked like a painting, the last tea party. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice weaker than I would have liked, but clear. "Oh, Ruthie," Grace said, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Where else would we be?" "We're going to look at pictures," I announced. "And we're going to tell stories, The good ones. Clara, ever practical, opened the first album. It was from when Sarah was a baby. There was a photo of David, looking impossibly young and proud, holding a swaddled Sarah in his massive hands. We all laughed. He was so afraid he would break you, I told Sarah. He used to sing her those awful off-key show tunes. Clara added, a rare, genuine smile on her face. Drove you nuts, Ruth. He did, I chuckled. But she loved it. We turned the pages, traveling through time. Sarah's first steps, captured in a blurry photo. Family vacations to the beach. Christmases with piles of wrapping paper. Sarah's graduation, her face beaming under her cap. Lily pointed at a picture of a young Sarah. Mama, she declared, and the sound of her little voice, so full of life in this room that was preparing for death, was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. We told stories about David, about his terrible puns, his love of bad action movies, the way he could fix anything with a piece of wire and sheer determination. We cried, but we also laughed until our sides hurt. I looked at my family, my sisters, my daughter, my granddaughter, all gathered together, bound by love and memory. This was my legacy. Not the money, not the house. This connection, this love. As the afternoon light began to fade, painting the room in shades of orange and purple, I grew tired. The energy required to hold on to the world was becoming too much. I think that's enough for today, I said softly. They understood. Grace began quietly gathering the teacups. Clara closed the photo album with a definitive snap. Sarah leaned over and kissed my forehead. I love you, Mom, she whispered. I love you too, my darling girl, I said. More than you will ever know. Lily, not to be outdone, scrambled onto the bed and gave me a wet, sloppy kiss on the cheek. Woo you, Gamma. I closed my eyes, imprinting the feeling of her small, warm body against mine, the sound of her voice, into my soul. They left the room quietly, leaving the door ajar. I could hear their murmured voices downstairs, a comforting hum of life continuing. I was alone, but not lonely. I was surrounded by the echoes of our laughter, the ghosts of our stories, the immense, tangible love that filled the house. I had fought my battles. I had won my peace. I had mended what was broken and secured what was precious. There was no fear, only a profound, deep gratitude. The final gathering was over. It was time for the final goodbye. The last few days were a slow drifting, like a boat untethering from its moorings and floating gently out to sea. I drifted in and out of sleep, the line between dreams and reality blurring. Sometimes I was a young woman, dancing with David in our tiny kitchen. Sometimes I was reading a story to a small, pajama-clad Sarah. Sometimes I was just floating in a warm, silent, dark sea, utterly at peace. I could hear them, my loved ones, as if from a great distance. The murmur of their voices was a lighthouse beam in my fog, guiding me back to consciousness for brief, precious moments. I felt Sarah's hand holding mine, her touch a tether to the world. I felt her wipe my brow with a cool cloth. I heard her reading to me from my favorite book, her voice steady and loving. I heard Grace singing a soft, old hymn, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. I heard Clara, her tone brusque but her words tender, telling me about her day, about the stubborn rose bush she was trying to prune for me. And I heard Lily, her little voice, asking, "Gamma Seep?" and Sarah's soft reply, "Yes, sweetheart, Grandma is sleeping." I wanted to tell them I could hear them, that their love was the last thing I would take with me on this journey. But I had no strength for words. All my strength was going into listening, into feeling, into loving them back with the last sparks of my consciousness. Then, one evening, I felt a shift, a change in the current. The pain that had been a constant, low-level companion for months simply vanished. A deep, profound calm settled over me. I felt lighter than I had in years. I opened my eyes. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp on the bedside table. Sarah was asleep, in the cot beside my bed. Her face relaxed in sleep, one hand stretched out toward me. She looked so young, so much like the little girl I used to watch sleep. I looked at her, memorizing every detail: the curve of her cheek, the way her hair fell across the pillow, the steady rise and fall of her breath. This was my daughter, my greatest accomplishment. My heart. I felt a presence then, a familiar warmth that had been absent for over a decade. I didn't see anything, but I knew, with a certainty that went beyond faith, that David was there. He was waiting for me. There was no fear, only a sense of welcome, of a journey completed and a reunion awaiting. It was time. I took one last long look at my sleeping daughter. I poured all the love I had ever felt for her, all the pride, all the forgiveness, all the hope for her future, into that look. It was my final blessing. Be strong, my darling, I thought. Be happy. You are so, so loved. Then I let go of the tether. I stopped fighting the current. I turned my face toward the warmth, toward the presence I had missed for so long. And I stepped out of the boat, into the light. The law office of Franklin Reed was cold, sterile. Sarah sat between Clara and Grace, her hands clenched in her lap, a black dress hanging loosely on her frame. The grief was a fresh, raw wound, and the formality of this occasion felt like salt being rubbed into it. Across the small, polished table sat Mark. He had shown up, despite the restraining order, his lawyer arguing that he had a spousal interest in the estate. He looked smug, confident. He had shaved, worn his best suit. He was a vulture who believed he was about to feast. Franklin Reed entered the room, his expression solemn. He carried a thin, blue-backed document, the last will and testament of Ruth Eleanor Thompson. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "We are here to read the will of the deceased, Ruth Thompson, as she directed." He put on his reading glasses and began with the formalities. Sarah barely heard them. She was still back in the quiet of her mother's bedroom, holding her hand, feeling the life slip away. The world had lost its color, its meaning. Then Franklin got to the substance. Article 3. He read, "I give, devise, and bequeath all of my estate, of whatever kind and wherever located, to my trustee, to be held, administered, and distributed pursuant to the terms of the Lily May Trust, which is incorporated herein by reference." Sarah's head came up. Trust? Mark leaned forward, a frown creasing his brow. A trust? What trust? Franklin ignored him and continued, explaining the structure. The assets, the house, the investments, the savings were all pouring into a trust for the primary benefit of Lily. Clara was named as the sole trustee, with full discretion and control. The grantor's daughter, Sarah Marie Evans, is specifically excluded from any direct inheritance of the estate's principal. Franklin read, his voice neutral. The air left Sarah's lungs, excluded. Mark shot up from his chair. "What? This is outrageous. You can't do that. I'm her husband. We have rights." "Please sit down, Mr. Evans," Franklin said, his voice like steel. "You have no rights here. You are not a beneficiary. You are mentioned only once, and I suggest you listen carefully." Mark sat down slowly, his face a thundercloud. Franklin continued, outlining the provisions for Sarah. The monthly stipend, which was generous enough to make Grace gasp softly. The $100,000 Fresh Start Fund, contingent upon her completing 2 years of therapy. The purpose of this fund, Franklin read, is to empower my daughter to build an independent life through home ownership in her name only, educational advancement, or entrepreneurial pursuit, as deemed appropriate by the trustee. Sarah listened, stunned. Her mother hadn't disinherited her out of faith. Spite. She had protected her. She had created a structure for her survival, for her independence. Then came the part about the house. The family home at 1814 Maple Drive is to be maintained by the trust in perpetuity. Franklin Reed. Sarah Marie Evans is granted the right to reside in the home for the duration of her life, but holds no ownership interest. Upon her death, the home passes outright to Lily Mae Evans. Furthermore, it is an explicit and inviolable condition of this trust that Mark Evans is never, under any circumstances, to be permitted to reside in the home. His name is never to be added to the deed. The silence in the room was absolute. Mark stared, his mouth agape. The smugness was gone, replaced by a look of pure, incandescent rage. He had been outmaneuvered, completely and utterly. The house he had coveted, the money he had schemed for, was forever beyond his reach. He was legally barred from the one asset he wanted most. He turned to Sarah, his eyes blazing. You knew about this, didn't you? You and your mother, you planned this together to screw me over. She knew, Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. She hadn't spoken until now. She looked at Mark, her gaze cold and contemptuous. Ruth told her. She believed Sarah deserved to hear the truth from her mother's own lips. And every word in this document is the truth. It's the truth about you, Mark. It's the truth about what you did. And it's Ruth's final word on the matter. Mark looked from Clara's triumphant face to Franklin's impassive one, to Sarah's tear-streaked but resolute expression. He had lost. Not just the money, but the war. His manipulation, his control, his lies, they had all been anticipated and neutralized by a quiet, dying woman. He stood up so violently, his chair scraped back. "This isn't over," he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. "I'll contest this. You'll never see a flawn. Dime!" Franklin Reed removed his glasses. "You are welcome to try, Mr. Evans, but I assure you this will is ironclad. It was drafted with your particular proclivities in mind. Any contest will be lengthy, expensive, and you will lose. Now, I must ask you to leave. This reading is for the beneficiaries, defeated, humiliated, and furious." Mark stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The room was silent again. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She looked at the will, at her mother's elegant signature at the bottom of the last page. It was her mother's voice, powerful, loving, and fierce, speaking from beyond the grave, setting her free. She wasn't disinherited. She was, for the first time, truly and completely protected. In the weeks following the reading of the will, a profound sense of peace settled over our home. The legal battle with Mark was, as Franklin predicted, short-lived. His lawyer took one look at the will and the extensive documentation of his financial abuse and advised him to settle the divorce quickly and quietly. He got nothing from my estate, and his attempts to fight for more of the marital assets were undermined by his own fraud. He faded from our lives, a bitter, diminished figure. The house on Maple Drive was no longer just a house. It was a fortress, a sanctuary, just as I had intended. With the threat of Mark permanently removed, Sarah could finally, fully breathe. The monthly stipend from the trust lifted the crushing weight of financial fear from her shoulders. For the first time in her adult life, she was financially secure and independent. She threw herself into her therapy with a dedication that would have made me proud. It was hard, painful work, excavating the layers of manipulation and rebuilding her sense of self-worth. But she did it. She showed up, week after week, and slowly the light returned to her eyes, brighter and steadier than before. She also enrolled in night classes, using the Fresh Start Fund to pursue a degree in graphic design, a passion she had abandoned when she married Mark. She was building a life, not for a man, not for an image, but for herself and her daughter. Lily thrived in the stability and love of our home. She started preschool, making friends, her world expanding in safe, happy ways. She talked about Gamma in the stars often, and Sarah would tell her stories about me, keeping my memory alive as a presence of love, not of loss. One sunny afternoon, about a year after I had passed, Clara and Grace came over for lunch. We sat in the garden, at the old wrought iron table David had found at a flea market and restored. "The roses are magnificent this year," Grace remarked, sipping her iced tea. "You've done a wonderful job, Sarah." "Mom taught me everything I know," Sarah said, smiling. It was a smile that reached her eyes now. "I feel her here, in the garden, more than anywhere else." Clara, who was reviewing the trust statements, looked up. "She's in this paperwork, too. Making sure you're taken care of. That Lily's college fund is growing." She thought of everything. "She did," Sarah agreed, her voice soft. "You know, for so long, I thought love was supposed to be easy, that if it was hard, it wasn't real. But Mom, she showed me that real love is sometimes tough. It's about setting boundaries, even when it hurts. It's about protecting the people you love, even from themselves." Her will wasn't an act of rejection. It was the ultimate act of love. Grace reached over and patted her hand. "She loved you more than life itself, Sarah. She just found a way to keep loving you after hers was over." I was there with them, in the dappled sunlight, in the scent of the David Austin roses, in the love that flowed between them. They couldn't see me, but they felt me. I was in the foundation of the house, in the petals of the flowers, in the strength that now shone in my daughter's face. My legacy wasn't the money, or the house, or the legal document. My legacy was this: a daughter who had found her power. A granddaughter who was growing up safe and loved. A family healed and whole. They had said I wasn't special enough for their new, glossy life. But in the end, I was the one who held the power. I was the one who wrote the final chapter. And I wrote it not with vengeance, but with a love so deep and so wise that it would echo for generations. The twist at the reading of my will wasn't a plot for revenge. It was a plan for redemption, and it worked. 5 years later, the garden at 1814 Maple Drive was the site of a party. Streamers fluttered from the porch, and the sound of children's laughter mixed with the chatter of adults. It was Lily's 8th birthday, and Sarah had thrown her a party fit for a princess. The house was different now, but the same. Sarah had painted the walls warmer colors, updated the kitchen, filled it with her own artwork and Lily's creations. It was vibrantly, unmistakably their home, yet the soul of the house, mine and David's, remained, a strong, quiet foundation. Sarah moved through the crowd of parents and children with an easy grace. She looked happy, truly, deeply happy. The strained, weary look was gone, replaced by a calm confidence. She had graduated with her design degree and had started a small, successful freelance business, working from the sunroom I had always loved. Clara and Grace were there, of course. Clara was manning the grill with a terrifying efficiency, barking orders at any parent who dared come too close. Grace was setting out the vast array of food she had prepared, fussing over every detail. The final guest to arrive was a man named Ben. He was a teacher at Lily's school, a kind-eyed man with a gentle demeanor and a warm laugh. Sarah had met him at a parent-teacher conference a year ago, and they had been dating for 6 months. Clara had vetted him thoroughly and, to everyone's surprise, had given her gruff approval. Ben walked over to Sarah, handing her a cold drink. "Everything looks great. Lily's having the time of her life." Sarah smiled up at him. "Thanks. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it." He slipped his arm around her waist. A simple, comfortable gesture. She's a great kid. You've done an amazing job with her. Watching them, my heart swelled with a joy so profound it felt like a physical presence. This was what I had wanted for her. A partner, not a master. A man who saw her strength and admired it, who supported her dreams, who loved Lily as his own. Later, as the party wound down and the last guest departed, Sarah, Ben, Clara, and Grace sat around the garden table, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and orange. Lily was showing Ben her new presents, her words tumbling out in an excited rush. "She has your energy, Ruth," Clara murmured, looking at Lily's boundless enthusiasm. "Never sits still." "And David's heart," Grace added softly. "So kind." Sarah looked around the garden, at her family, at the home that was her sanctuary. "I was thinking," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I'm going to use the rest of the Fresh Start Fund." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Oh? For what? You've already got the business." "I'm going to build a studio," Sarah said, her eyes shining with excitement. "In the backyard. A proper one, with big north-facing windows for light. A place where I can work, and where Lily can have art classes with her friends. A creative space." Ben squeezed her hand. "That's a fantastic idea." "It's what Mom would have wanted," Sarah said, her gaze sweeping over the rose bushes. She always believed in creating beautiful things, in making a space for joy. It was true. I loved the idea. A studio, a place of creation and growth, built on the foundation of the safety and security I had provided. As darkness fell and the fireflies began to blink in the twilight, Lily ran over to Sarah, clutching the old, worn stuffed elephant. "Can I sleep with Ellie tonight, Mama?" she asked. "Of course, sweetie," Sarah said, hugging her. "Gamma gave me Ellie," Lily told Ben, matter-of-factly. "She did?" Ben said, smiling. "Yep." "She loved me very much," Lily said, and then she ran off toward the house, her little figure silhouetted against the glowing windows. There was a moment of comfortable silence. "She did," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion as she looked at Ben. "She loved us both so much that she figured out how to keep loving us, even after she was gone. The new beginning wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about building a future upon its lessons. The pain had been transformed into strength. The betrayal had been transformed into wisdom. The love had never left. It had simply changed form. My story was over, but theirs was just beginning. And it was a beautiful story to watch. If you're listening to this, then you've heard my story. The story of a mother who was told she wasn't special enough, and the twist that came at the reading of her will. It's a story of pain, yes, of betrayal and heartbreak. But I hope, more than anything, that you hear it as a story of love, a fierce, unyielding warrior's love. People might think the moral of my story is about getting revenge, that the twist was a final gotcha from beyond the grave, but they'd be wrong. The real twist wasn't in the legal language, or in disinheriting my daughter, or in barring my son-in-law from my home. The real twist was forgiveness. The real twist was grace. You see, I learned something in my final years. I learned that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It eats you from the inside. For years, I was consumed by the hurt of being pushed aside, of being used, of being erased. It was a dark, heavy weight. But when I let that go, when I chose to see my daughter not as a villain, but as a lost soul caught in a manipulator's web, that's when I found my true power. The power to love without condition, but with boundaries. The power to protect without being punitive. The power to write an ending that was not about spite, but about salvation. My will was my final lesson to Sarah. It was me saying, "I see you. I see the strong, capable woman you are beneath the fear and the manipulation. And I am going to create a world where you have no choice but to become her. I didn't give her a handout. I gave her a hand up. I gave her the tools to build her own life on her own terms. And to all of you listening, to anyone who has ever felt taken for granted, made to feel small, or told you aren't special enough, I want you to learn from me. Your worth is not determined by how others treat you. It is inherent. It is yours. You are special simply because you exist. It is never too late to set a boundary. It is never too late to say, "This is not acceptable." It is never too late to reclaim your power, your peace, and your life. And love is not about saying yes to everything. Sometimes the most profound act of love is to say no. No, you cannot treat me this way. No, you cannot have this part of me. No, I will not finance my own dismissal. Family is not just about blood. It's about who shows up for you. It's about the people who hold your hand in the dark, who speak the truth even when it's hard, who fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. My sisters, Grace and Clara, were my family. Their love was my anchor. So, as Auntie Ruth, this is my final lesson for you. Live your life with love, but be a warrior for that love. Protect it, honor it, and never, ever let anyone make you feel like you are not special enough to receive it in return. Your story is yours to write. Make sure you're the one holding the pen. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.